Welcome back to Fresh Outlook, everyone. I'm Logan Crawford. This Monday, America honors a civil rights hero, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. His acts of peaceful protests are credited with changing the United States and helping make strides for blacks in the U.S., including the election of President Barack Obama. Take a look.
I still have a dream.
In a time of racial segregation, he was a landmark proponent of organized, nonviolent resistance in a quest to civil rights. The efforts of Martin Luther King Jr. was to bridge the social and economic gap between the haves and the have-nots. January 15th would have been King's 86th birthday. In his 1957 speech, "Give us the ballot, we will transform the South," he preached a stronger, better, and more democratic America would emerge if diverse voices were included in the electorate and permitted to influence legislation and office holders. There is no doubt that during the next 58 years, the country has undergone substantial changes. But it is also obvious that race is still an issue in this country. Voting rights, policing, and continued discrimination continue to make the nightly news. A Pew Research poll found that nearly 9 in 10 blacks say discrimination still exists, and nearly 6 in 10 African Americans still live in segregated neighborhoods. Dr. King lamented that he longed for an America that would judge his children not based on the color of their skin, but the content of their character. So, where are we now, and where are we going?
We're back live on set here at Fresh Outlook. I am joined by the Ebru think tank, Reverend Forrest Pritchett of the MLK Leadership Program, Amanda Saunders of the MLK Scholarship. She is the president of that association, and Dr. Uhura Williams, who is the vice president for academic affairs at Fairfield University. Dr. Pritchett, I'm going to start with you and ask you about the State of the Dream 2015. We hear about that every year. What is your State of the Dream at this point?
I hope it's not becoming the living nightmare. We thought for all the progress that we were making, that indeed, and I could include in that more recently with the election of Barack Obama to the second term, that America would have the dream just bursting out of their bosoms at this point in time. I think what we're seeing now is that residual of institutionalized, individualized racism, which refuses to die. And they are attempting to flame the embers, if you would, of the old America. But we would call America to its newness. America was always great from the very beginning, I think, based upon that idea of freedom and inclusion. And if anything, we all in the 21st century need to be working together, coalitions, allies, and helping to make that dream new and fresh again. What we see going on all over America, we think are new coalitions. The new civil rights movement of the 21st century is now emerging.
Why is it that a country that elected Barack Obama president seems more polarized than ever since that election?
I think it's rather, I could phrase it this way. I think 1 out of 3 folks are clinging to the past. 2 out of 3 can live with a new future. And I think that 1/3 residual are, I hope it's their last dying breath. That they're trying to hold on to life. They would like to be resurrected, but I hope the patient dies on the operating table.
So those are the reactionaries who don't want to let go of the past and our tarnished history.
A number of years ago, we had one of our law school professors at Seton Hall who did a study with using law students in which they were looking at the receptiveness of the public for voting for anyone of the Islamic faith, a woman, an African American. Now, this was before the first election. And I believe they uncovered these little pockets, and they also found some age correlates. Hard to generalize, but folks over a certain age, for example, say over the age of 50, you might have found that 2 out of 3 may have been those who really were clinging to the past. Then 50 and under, much more, as you move down that age group to like the age of 25, much more receptiveness and increasing a large percentage of folks who are more inclined to be open to embrace all of the full ideas of American democracy.
Amanda, you're a college student?
Yes.
Where do you go to school?
I go to Seton Hall University. I'm a senior and I'm a business marketing major.
Do you feel that you live under the specter of prejudice?
I feel that as a student, we do have to deal with different prejudices, but I feel like they're more on a subliminal level. I feel like they're not as outward as they have been inside of the past. So trying to identify what those prejudices are may be the difficulty that we find inside of our generation. And it does put an elephant in the room when the conversation is being had.
That's an interesting point, Uhuru, that you don't know what you don't know. So you don't know what's holding you back or what obstacles will be put in your place when people perhaps in 2015 have learned to put a pretty face on it, but might not be giving you that job, might not be giving you that appointment, might not be giving the opportunity that someone else might be getting if they shared the same race.
And herein lies the problem, because if we look at what Dr. King talked about concretely, not just Dr. King, but all the organizations that made up the civil rights movement, they give us a very clear litmus test. How are we doing on housing, education, employment, voting rights, Jim Crow justice? If we force the nation to take that test at this moment, we've had some success, but we've also had some dismal failures and rollbacks of many of the triumphs that we could associate with that decade of the 1960s. Sections of the Voting Rights Act now find themselves under scrutiny by the United States Supreme Court. We have a situation where you have Jim Crow justice essentially creeping back into, some would say never left, the American landscape. You've got situations where in housing and education and black unemployment rates, clearly as a society, if we hold a mirror up, we don't have a lot to be excited about, because what we see are the rollback of many of the gains that were made by that generation. And young people who are aware, but in many ways, as Amanda pointed out, in a position not really to address those issues because they don't have the knowledge necessary in order to apply it to where they stand at the present moment.
Dr. Pritchett, I find that race is invoked an awful lot by President Obama. I understand as the first black president, he might find that a responsibility, not only as a president, but as a special responsibility as the first man of his race to hold that position.
Yes, sir.
But at times, I find it polarizing, and I'll tell you why. For example, when Trayvon Martin was killed.
Yes.
Trayvon Martin could have been my son.
Yes, sir.
You don't have to be black to relate to the Trayvon Martin case. And when President Obama said that he was hurt by this case because Trayvon Martin could be his son, I felt it kind of diminished it and diminished the presidency a little bit, because I think he should be touched by every young person's death who isn't innocent. Certainly. What are your thoughts?
I believe Obama was attempting to really humanize the office of the presidency. In many cases, the president of the United States knows he must represent everyone, and that if he were to have, in a sense, come with the broader view that we all have to do better, he's indicating that while I am your president, I would like to take a moment to let you know just how this touches me, that I'm a human being, and we have to recognize in many cases that the African-American population of all of the groups in America has been the group who has been subject to 300 years of various forms of racial indignities. That's a hard thing to say in many cases, but among ourselves, we have that conversation all the time. And in some cases, he's simply indicating here, I'm going to remove the politeness of the moment to indicate we can all do better. And I, as a man who is the president of the United States, is making this statement. I believe it was bold. For many of us have been looking for a long time to have that type of representation. Not that he has to distance himself from other groups, but he's got to humanize, I think, the black existence in America today. Black lives do matter.
I agree with Dr. Pritchett, but I would also say I disagree with that in this sense. Trayvon Martin, if we look statistically, would have been your son, Logan. The numbers themselves indicate that the problem
not have been my son.
Could not have been your son,
right.
In the sense that the numbers themselves in these types of encounters tend to be young men of color who find themselves in these types of situations. President Obama shed tears for the students in Sandy Hook, and I applauded that. He shed tears for Christina Green, who was shot in Arizona by crazed gunmen who also shot Congresswoman Gabby Giffords. I applauded that. When he said what he said about Trayvon Martin, I think for some African Americans it was a little too late, because what they were looking for was someone in the office, the executive office of the president, who could say, with this experience, I'd like to enlighten the nation about what this historically has meant. And it came for some too late. So I think in a lot of ways the president gets criticized unfairly for bringing it up, and yet among certain populations there are people who say he's not doing enough, we wish he'd do more.
It's interesting because it all matters on standpoint, where you stand. I mean, I'm a white man, I'm Catholic, Irish, Italian, I have my legacy, my history, the prejudices my family has faced, but I grew up always looking at a white male president saying that I could grow up to be like him, or my son could grow up to be like him. To have a hero in Barack Obama for this next generation of black men and black women is a great thing, in my opinion. Do you find President Obama has fulfilled his promise? I don't know if you were old enough to vote for him in 2008, but you might have voted for him in 2012. You might have worked on his campaign. Is he a hero to you? Has he done enough? You know, I think we have a little division here as to whether he's actually done enough, and you're living it more than any of us because you're younger.
I believe that President Obama is definitely a hero, and he's someone that young African Americans can look up to and hope to aspire to be in their future, and see that that's something that they actually can achieve. And in terms of if I feel like he's been doing enough, I think that he has surpassed the expectations that I had when I voted for him in the 2012 election. And I always take into account what he was handed when he did start his presidency too, and how he had to maneuver through that in addition to executing his own agenda as well. So I believe that President Obama is definitely a hero and that he has done a lot, and I'm grateful.
Dr. Pritchett, one of his goals was a colorblind society.
Yes, sir.
Are we getting closer to that? How do we achieve that, in your opinion?
Well, we can just all work together as we think about Rodney King, and we can all just get along.
Right.
But actually, since his election, over the last 7 years, a number of our social research institutes and various universities have been testing the various hypotheses involved with the post-racial construct. As Dr. Rue has just mentioned, from housing, jobs, income, sentencing, we're still seeing disparities, and we're testing this in the last 5 to 6 years. For many of us, unfortunately, this empirical validation of the fact that indeed the election of one man who ran a very competent election may be one positive factor, but we're generating hundreds of factors that appear to be very dismal. One very recent study, for example, done by, I think, psychologists at Stanford University who specialize in social personality, where they were simply using the constructs on paper for young men based upon their looks, and indicating if a young man that you're looking at was accused of a crime, which ones would, and those who were being respondents seemed to project more anger onto those figures that were brown and black as opposed to the white figures.
Yeah, it's implicit bias, where people will be shown a woman and shown a man, which one's a doctor, which one's a nurse. Everybody assumes right away the woman is the nurse and the man is the doctor, which is the criminal, which is, and in fact, Michael Moore actually had a very interesting experiment with this. He had a convicted killer who was white, hail a taxi, 20 yards away from a black Tony-winning actor, hail a taxi, and everybody kept on bypassing the black award-winning actor to pick up the convicted killer, to show the prejudice, either implicit or explicit, on the part of New York City taxi drivers.
Indeed. So I think what we really are seeing when we look at the construct of post-racial, we're seeing a attitude which is more verbal being expressed versus when it comes to overt behavior, is still where we need a lot of work to be done.
We're going to fine-tune our conversation. When we come back, we're going to take a look at a crucial march for civil rights through the eyes of a filmmaker, and why the movie Selma is raising some eyebrows. After this.